Hey friends, how are you? I'm just feeling kind of something today, and we're going to talk about. I wanted to share with you what's happening with my knitting first and foremost. This is Lisa from Life with Five, a knitting podcast where I talk about knitting and its connection to my life, your life, everybody's life, how knitting contributes to a good life, how knitting can help us to lean into our creativity and become happier, even deepen our spirituality. So those are all the topics, but through that lens, through that wide lens of all those topics, we focus in on various things. I'm going to show you some things that I'm working on right now. I'm going to talk about Rhinebeck, what happened there, and show you some clips of that. And it was, a lot of fun. And then I'm going to talk about a pretty controversial topic that I didn't realize was controversial, but has caused, some people to like hate on me for my thoughts about it. And I, if that's the case, probably has been talked about in other formats that I'm just not aware of. But so let's start with what's happening on the needles right now. I am knitting a pretty basic, here it is, and I just started the sleeve, one of the first sleeve. It's going to be an Elizabeth Zimmerman bottom up raglan, more or less. I'm using the percentage system. Turtleneck. It's going to be a raglan turtleneck. I'm using this yarn, which is Tibetan wool. It's called Tibetan Cloud by Emyak, and I really like this yarn. It's a little more expensive than I normally spend, but I know that this sweater is going to be like a basic, something I'm going to use a lot, and I want it to I don't want it to pill, and I don't want it to be uncomfortable, and I want it to just kind of fit me really well and just be a basic knit. It's not anything, there's nothing crazy happening. I'm not doing any cables. I'm not doing a little bit of a rib where I do like knit in the back, purl, knit one in the back, knit and purl one, and that's just the 1x1 rib. Gives a nice clean rib, I find. Here's a close-up of that. Yeah, I like that. That's kind of like my new favorite rib to use. And it's stretchy, but it also is very crisp and neat, and I kind of like that in a cuff. It's going to be a little oversized, and I think I'm gonna do like bracelet sleeves with this, and because the sleeves are wide. I'm doing them at 40% of my total knit stitch count, so it's like 88 stitches, and it's about 20 inches, I would say, around, which is pretty big, right? It's going to be a little bit of a bell sleeve, but I'm going to have it end around here. So it'll be a little bit of a bracelet sleeve. So it won't be too much in my way during the day, and short enough that I'm not going to be constantly pulling it up. And it's going to be a pain to put under a coat. I know that, but like, I'm just learning here, right? And part of what I do on this podcast, I'm not an expert by any stretch. I'm here to learn and become the best knitter that I can be. And my favorite teacher is Elizabeth Zimmerman, and I love her because she empowers us to make our own designs. And not that I don't love knitting patterns. I do. I love knitting patterns. I occasionally do them, but I find this year I really wanted to focus on doing my own designs so that I could really strengthen my skills and really doing a pattern, understand why I'm doing things, and have options when I'm doing them. Like if I don't necessarily want to go in the direction that the pattern is taking me, that I can understand what the designer is doing, and change my direction in a good way. So I'm just taking a break. I was knitting Sophie. I'm still knitting Sophie's cable Aran sweater, the cardigan sweater, which is here, and it's a behemoth project. And let me see if I think the back is a little bit easier to see the cables. The cables are really cool. I love them. I'm really having fun with this. And this is gonna be a cardigan with a steek. There's a steek here in the center. And I haven't even started the sleeves, and that's gonna be a drop shoulder construction. So I have a lot happening. There's a lot happening on the needles these days. On the needles, and then in the knitting stratosphere as well. It's so interesting. So, again, another reason that I love to do this podcast, that it's something that I do to connect with other people who also believe that knitting can be a practice to help us release negative thoughts, come back to ourselves, and kind of lull us into the rhythm of knitting, and in turn calm us and allow us to have greater, stronger footing in this crazy world that we live in, with that just becomes more and more intense every day. So that's also another piece of it. And I just recently was looking at some books by Elizabeth, and I came across a quote that I thought was really beautifully encapsulated that very sentiment that I just shared with you. So I'm going to read it for you now. And Elizabeth says, knitting patterns have much in common with metrical poetry. The row is the line. Patterns of stitches are like feet, elaborate or simple, playing out in and off syllables, with occasional wild substitutions like lace stitches or cables. Textures and color, the pleasure of materials, gauge, and there is a similar pleasure in watching something magically form beneath our hands. And I love that. I love that idea, because everything that I knit is always it's always different than I intended it to be, but somehow for that reason it's much more meaningful to me. In college I used to write a lot of poems, and in class especially, people would often tell that we would listen to the poem, and that people would say what they thought it meant. And I was always so surprised that what people took from my poem was so different than what I thought I intended. And then as I started to look at my own writing and kind of take it apart, I almost didn't know what it was that I meant. So it was like the poem became something separate from me. It became an object unto itself, and I almost couldn't really determine what the meaning was behind the poem. And I feel that way about knitting as well. When I knit something, I have an intention for it. I have plans for it, right? I can picture it in my mind. I can picture me wearing it. And then when I have it, it's something different. It's its own thing. But that's part of the magic, and that's part of what I love about knitting, is that you don't know what you're going to get. And it's such a personal expression, but yet it's also something that comes through you and is not necessarily so personal, right? It's a really interesting process. But getting back to this idea of rhythm, and the soothing quality of rhythm, and the natural quality of rhythm, the rhythm of knitting, sometimes when I've had an especially tense day, or a day where I just feel pulled in so many different directions, either by students or issues that happen at work, and my mind is so frazzled and feels so disjointed, and there's so many concerns that are foremost in my mind. When I sit, sometimes I don't want to sit down to knit. But when I do sit down to knit, and I start to just focus on the stitches and just be quiet and just focus on, just kind of just pay attention to the work, what happens is my mind starts to involuntarily slow down, get into the rhythm, and almost like take on a breathing pattern. And I just slowly calm down. And I recently heard something that talked about the difference between men and women in terms of how they relax, and that I have found this to be true, actually, that men use action to create rest. When they come home from work, they often need to perform some kind of action that kind of discharges the energy of the day, whereas women feel the need to kind of have quiet time, and that resting is a good way to actually create more rest. And I don't know if that depends on the type of woman that you are, if the type of mind that you are. It was an Ayurvedic theory, and I tend to be someone who has who has a very active mind, and that my mind goes and goes and goes. And knitting seems to help to quiet my mind. And I can knit for an hour, and then I feel like I'm ready to do some meditation, and I'm ready to go even deeper into that quiet state. And then by the time I'm ready for bed, I'm completely ready for bed, and I rest really well. So this whole idea of rest and stress and finding ways to balance these lives of ours that are so incredibly hectic, and and that knitting is a simple way for us to kind of take steps towards more rest, also while being productive and doing something that is useful. I went to Rhinebeck last week. Rhinebeck was so much fun. I saw so many of you there, or not so many, I saw some of you there, and it was really fun to see you, and it was fun to be around knitters. It's been a while since I've been to Rhinebeck. Last year we couldn't go because of something related to school. And then the year before that, it was COVID. So being there, being around all those knitters, being around everybody wearing their gorgeous sweaters, being on the hill and seeing all the designers and the podcasters and all that stuff was really fun. I had a really nice short meeting with Caitlin Hunter, and she's such a sweet person and such a, just really humble and kind. And I saw the guys from Needles by the Ready podcast, I think that's called. They were, I didn't talk to them, but I saw them and they were nearby me. And I briefly saw the woman, or one of the women from, is it Skein Cocaine or Cocaine Skein? I saw them. So that was kind of fun. There was so much yarn there, so much to see. And it felt a little overwhelming, the amount of yarn. There was some beautiful, beautiful yarns that I saw. I really loved, one of my favorite things that I loved there was the Harrisville Designs. They came out with these beautiful dark shades. I think they're called nightshades. And they're these beautiful, it's like shades of black with hints of color kind of built into them. And I ended up purchasing one for Mark's. I'm going to make a hat for Mark, and they're just really rich, and they have great stitch definition. And they had them on display with all these cable sweaters, and they just looked so unique and modern and beautiful with the cable patterns and the and it just seemed like it was so soft and it was beautiful. So I said, I'm gonna buy some of that. So I don't buy yarn. I'm not a yarn buyer. I don't know how the rest of you are. I really buy the yarn when the project calls for it, but I love to look at yarn. I love to shop for yarn and just see how it looks, see how it feels, and and then keep lists. I keep lists of yarn, and then I use them in small projects. I become more familiar with them. But the danger with me is that I could spend a ton of money on yarn. I'm more of a pattern collector. I see a pattern and I'm like, I have to have that pattern. So I have, on my Ravelry page, I have hundreds probably of patterns, and I don't, so I really try to hold myself to making the projects that I want to make and using the yarn that I have. And I've shared with you before, I tried if you look on my yarn wall, this is the same yarn. I don't go through, I'm not constantly buying yarn, and I don't have tons and tons of shells of yarn. And a lot of the yarn that I've gotten here has been secondhand yarn. So, that I found at a thrift store or something. So, I'm aware that knitting can be a really expensive hobby, and I think it's a good hobby. It's a good, worthwhile, and it's great to support knitters and to support yarn suppliers that are local and doing interesting things. But it's just for me, I think it's also important to find that balance between what can I afford to do, what are my desires to do, and because we can find ourselves just like with food, it's like your eyes can be bigger than your stomach, and then you have all this yarn, and then there's always more yarn to want. So it's like I let myself want a yarn for a while before I really buy it, and I look around and I look at what's available to me locally in thrift stores and things like that. And if I can use something locally, then I will. And I'm always on the lookout for like affordable yarns that I can just use to make big patterns with. I was thinking of all of this as I'm at Rhinebeck, and and I'm looking at all the yarns and all the superwash yarns. And here's where the controversy is going to come. And I got really kind of on an online forum, I was kind of, some people called me elitist and said that I was not sensitive to pricing of yarns, and that could be true. I'm not, but my feeling was that I was really surprised at the process that's involved in superwash. I did not realize that I knew that chemicals were involved in it, and it was never like my favorite. I don't really have, I think I have maybe one yarn in here that is superwash. I never really was interested in superwash. I'm not a huge sock knitter. And I just really prefer the feel of natural wool. And I somehow came across like the process, and I was just really surprised. I knew, like, as I said, I knew that there were chemicals involved in the process, but I didn't realize that it was also coated with plastic, and that when you wash the clothes, that the plastics then go into the groundwater. And it just made me think about that, and I've been thinking recently, there was an article just about how much plastic is in our clothes, how much plastics are in the clothing supply, and that, plastics have helped us in the past, and they've made a lot of things really more functional and cleaner. But we have so many plastics now, and it's part of, if you think that the climate crisis is important, we really do need to kind of think about our relationship to those. And this is not to say that knitters are responsible for solving the climate crisis in any way, or that knitters can even solve the climate crisis in any way. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. I'm just simply suggesting that when we look closely at the things that we purchase and what we're really actually purchasing, and what kind of systems we are a part of when we purchase, that just kind of helps to disengage us a little bit from this greater system of being a consumer, being in an economy that is, so powerful, and so such a powerful system unto itself. And that by any way that we can disengage and give ourselves some space from that system gives us more freedom, gives us more agency. And if enough of us do that, and if enough of us think about those things on a regular basis, it might be incremental change, but it still is change, right? And in order to make the big changes, the big systemic changes that will come eventually from government, that involve big changes for corporations and for the environment, we all need to change on them on the micro level, right? And so I was just really surprised, and I don't know how the rest of you feel. I know that superwash is very convenient if you have children, and if you wash your knits and you wear a lot of your knits all the time. I know that it's super convenient. I also know that it is possible to wash wool, and my wool, I find my wool garments very easy to care for. I don't wash them that often because I am always wearing something underneath them. And when I do wash them, I just simply, hand wash them, put them on a towel, and kind of just block them out. And they're ready in a few days. And to me, it's not that big of a deal, but I'm not, I get it. My kids were small at one time, and I know how rough it is with keeping up with laundry and all of that. So I'm not judging anybody. I just, I was surprised by that. I had thoughts about it, and I wanted to bring it here and hear what other people thought about it. It's interesting because the last video that I had, I talked about, and I showcased my friend Tammy White's farm, Wing and a Prayer, and she is she's a sheep raiser, a farmer, and produces her own wool, and she only dyes her wool with natural plant-based flowers and plant stuff from her garden. And someone said to me on YouTube that I was promoting her, was being overly promoting of her. And I feel like if I was, then I'm really happy about that, because I feel like she's a really good person to promote. I feel like that's the kind of business that I would like to know about if I were watching this podcast and I didn't know about it. And I think that Vermont producers in general tend to be pretty clean on this issue. I think of Green Mountain Spinnery. I have to actually go back on my notes when I did an interview with them. I think they're also pretty clean with their dyes. I know they do a lot of organic wools, and I know that they I don't believe that they have a superwash wool. And so it's just these are the choices that we make. And I think that there is a big economic factor in it, that people can't afford to buy certain yarns, and that they think that that yarn is just expensive. And I'm very sensitive to that. I'm aware of that, and that is a legitimate reason. And or people who are sensitive to mohair instead of nylon and for sock wool and things like that. If you just don't like mohair, you shouldn't be forced to use mohair. I understand it. Some people accused me of being elitist, and I said that knitting in and of itself is kind of a luxury hobby, and that got a lot of negative feedback. But what I mean by that is that 47% of our planet's population make less than $7 a day and live on that. I consider that, I don't consider, that is considered to be very, very poor. And so therefore, if we are talking about yarn, if we have the time and the space and the energy to knit, we are privileged in a way. There is a certain amount of inherent privilege there. And so therefore, I feel like being privileged in that way, we have an obligation to look at it. And you can, of course, there's freedom within that examination to choose what you believe about this. There's a whole other side of it, right? There's hand dyers who make beautiful yarns, and you're supporting an independent business, and it's a woman-based business. And I get it, there's two sides to it. But I do think it's really, I'm not thrilled about the plastic piece of it. And and I'm just curious what others think. So I'm sure I'm going to get lots of negative comments, but I'm okay. I can deal with it. No one who lives in an industrialized country like the US or Europe or, the wealthier parts of the world, we're all complicit, right? We all benefit from, whether we actually acknowledge it or whether we actually participate in the modes of production that are involved in that. But we all benefit from, it's a benefit to us because we can have more. We take so much of that pie, the consumption pie. I do think that it's a good spiritual question to ask ourselves, well, what's our role in this and how do I feel about it? Something that struck me at Rhinebeck, it felt like there were so many of us there, so many people at Rhinebeck, and I thought of us as a demographic, and I thought of us as a buying group. And we do have the ability to, make some change if we wanted to really kind of become more aware and make positive changes. So that's that. That's my big controversy. And with that, I'm gonna sign off. I'll put some stuff at the end of this, some pictures from Rhinebeck, just so you can see what it was like. And hope that you are well, hope that you are knitting, and hope that you are staying positive in these challenging times. Namaste.
called wet felting, where you take wool fibers and you use warm soapy water and basically agitation, and then it turns fibers into fabric.
These are amazing.
These are called valenki, authentic Russian wool boots.
I love it. They're probably so warm. Now, would you wear this in the snow? Is it like an everyday boot?
Oh yeah, I have. I'm wearing them, and I take my dogs out. Like I started a new pair this season, but they lasted me a couple of years. And then what you do is take them out, take a sharp pair of scissors, and cut them like this. And I have a pair of slippers at home.
Oh yeah, that's so great.
J'aimerais qu'elle soit mieux ça.
Pared it down to 5, but I think we're going to pick it back up to 7 next year.
Again, I like the color slightly off.
Amazing.